Hello and greetings, everyone. I am His Majesty Jamel McCray, and welcome all to our YouTube channel. For those of you that don't know us, I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Jamel McCray. Some refer to me as His Majesty Jamel McCray, and I am a black gay married man. And my husband's name is Joseph, and we together are known as the McCray Kings. We are on all social media platforms: Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and new to YouTube. We do celebrity interviews, we do reviews on different things, different shows. We do mukbangs, um, a host of different things. And for those of you that are new to the channel, please make sure that you hit the subscribe button and also hit the notification bell so that you will get notifications when we post new videos. I'd like to apologize for the absence of my husband. Unfortunately, he had a stroke several days ago, and he is currently recovering. So in his absence, I will be doing some reviews on my own, and I will also be doing some story times as well. And my husband will also be doing some story times also. Um, with that being said, let's get into this. I want to talk. I want to talk to you guys today about my experience with the Church of God in Christ and how I was a member of the Church of God in Christ for 28 years, and I had to walk away from the Church of God in Christ. And I do have a church home, but it's a different denomination, and we'll get into that as well. But I first want to get into the reason why I left the Church of God in Christ. Now, for those of you that know me, I'm a very optimistic person, and I don't like to badger. I don't like to banter, and I don't like to judge. I really, really don't like to judge. But I decided that in 2020, I was going to, and it's not that I haven't, but I was going to not only live in my truth, but I was going to really, really be my authentic self. I want to show you guys my authentic self, who I am, what my aesthetic is, and my opinions, and everything. I want to share that with you guys. So that is the reason why I decided to start this story time forum. So with that being said, let's get into why I left the Church of God in Christ. As I stated, I joined the Church of God in Christ um, as a official member. I became an official member of the Church of God in Christ back in 1990. My father had passed away, and my mom had. There was this church up the street that it was a big white church up the street from our house at the time, and it was a beautiful church. This church was in the heart of just a whole lot of melee, but it stood out. It always stood out to us. And my younger sister, Kelly, was a friend of the pastor's granddaughter, and she had always invited us to come to church. And so after my father passed away, my mother, who lived right down the street, had decided to start going to this church. And I'm not gonna give you the name of the church because I don't want to bring any negativity to the church. But I my mom started going to the church, and she eventually ended up joining in 1990 as well. And one day she decided that she asked me to go to church with her one day, and I said okay. And unfortunately, she wasn't able to make it that day. I can't remember why because it was so long ago. She wasn't able to make it to church that day, but she told me to go anyway, and I went anyway. And I went to this church, and I sat in on the service, and I had a great time. I really did. I had a great time, so much so that I decided to go back. And at this time, my sister, my younger sister, my baby sister, she was still in her teens, and her and I, we went to church with my mom one Sunday, and we decided to join. But prior to us deciding to join, we had gone to service a couple of times. We had gone to a couple of services. We had gone to revival. We went to a couple of special services that they had, and really the fellowship was great. That's the one thing that I loved about the church. That was the one thing that was so inviting about my church, was the fellowship. That was the one thing that made me make the decision to join, because I wanted to be a part of not only the Church of God in Christ, but I wanted to be a part of the congregation. The congregation was just so positive. This church was made up of a man, a father, who had raised all his children in the church. He had I think the pastor had, well, he had quite a few children. It was about 10 of them, and some of them were members of the church, and some of them weren't. And he was married, beautiful wife, family, beautiful family. The daughter was the organist, the son, choir director, some of the daughters, evangelists, just the average, well, I wouldn't, I hate to say average, but just the average church family that you would see. Uh, a pastor have. He had the past. He was a pastor. He had a family, a big family. All his children were involved in church, which, for the most part, most ministers who have a church, who lead a church, they're most for the most part their immediate family is involved, such as the wife, who is the first lady, and the children who hold different positions in the church. But like I said, the one thing that really, really attracted me to going to this church was the fellowship in the congregation. The pastor's children were the nicest people that you would ever want to meet in your whole entire life. You would look at them and you could never see them do any wrong. Like, I've never heard any of the pastor's kids curse. I've never seen them be out of line, or be anything other than representing their church. I mean, they always had, all of them had great personalities. Um, and I was pretty good friends with the choir director. He was married to a very famous and popular gospel singer in the city where I grew up at, in Patterson. And he was a great person, really great person. I sang on the choir. As you guys know, I'm an artist, a singer, songwriter, and musician. So I sang on the choir, and he was a great he's a great choir director. And unlike what you hear about in a lot of churches, black churches, he wasn't your typical average gay black choir director. Now, I hate to say that. I really I hate to say that, but it's the truth. A lot of black Pentecostal churches, the ministers of music are normally these flamboyant gay men that are, and I'm not trying to take anything away from them because I'm gay, but they add flavor and style and substance to the choir. And but my choir director, he was that, but he was he was a heterosexual black man. Um, and I was on the choir. Uh, and like I said, this church was beautiful. I used to rave, and my pastor, he was a great man. He's passed on now, but he was a great man. He was one of those pastors that you could pick up the phone and you can call him and you can talk to him about anything. and he would not look at you with judgment. He would not look at you and say that you're evil and you need to be destroyed, or we need to pray over you and stuff. My church wasn't like that. Even though it was a Church of God in Christ, my church wasn't like that. My church wasn't one of those churches that, with the with judgmental people. You know, um, my church was, it was a euphoria in the church world. It was a euphoria in the church world, because I don't care who you were. I don't care who you were or what you did. You can come to my church and you did not have to worry about being judged. You did not have to worry about people talking behind your back. You did not have to worry about, you just didn't have to worry about the ridicule. And that was one of the things that I liked about going to this church. Well, as I stated, my pastor, he passed away. He passed away back in 2005, I want to say. I can't remember exactly what year he passed away, but he passed away in 2005. And so that kind of left, and the church had always, it was his church. He founded this church. So just about everybody that had a high position in the hierarchy of the church were his family, his daughters, his wife, his son-in-law, his daughter-in-law. I mean, the whole family was just all involved in the church, and they were all great people, all of them. But he passed away, my pastor. He passed away in 2005. And at the time when he passed away, I had moved away. I was living in Tennessee, but I was still a member of the church. Although I wasn't an active member, I was still considered a member of the church. But, anytime I came home, anytime I came back to Jersey, this was my church home. I would go to church, and people, they would welcome me as if I was at church the last Sunday. I kid you not. There was never any judgment or anything. Now, let me just say this about my homosexuality and my church. I have always lived my life comfortably, for the most part, in my adult years, comfortably as a black gay man. And it was a different day and age. But I have to say, I never had to hide the fact that I was gay from my church family. I never had to explain it, and nobody ever asked me. I've never heard anybody, say anything negative about me or derogatory about me. Nobody has ever come back to me and said that any of my church members have ever said anything bad about me. I've always been able to go to church with open arms. People in my church, they were genuinely happy to see me. And this is what I loved about this church. And this is why I stayed a member of this church for so many years, is because the love was there. That was the one place that I got love. I got love, I got acceptance. I didn't have to worry about people talking behind my back. It was just great. It was just a great experience. And so sporadically throughout that 28 years, I came back and forth. I came back and forth in church because I moved around a lot. And this, between 1990 and now, I've lived in so many different states. It's ridiculous. But I was always, anytime I decided to move back to Jersey, I was always able to go to church and people just be genuinely happy to see me. They were like a family to me. They were like my family. They were more than just the choir director and the pastor and the co-pastor and the evangelist and, the children in the church and the congregation. We were family. We were family. And I think what bridged everything is that the pastor's family was involved in the church, so much so that their family You saw their family dynamics, so it kind of like it rained down on the congregation because the pastor's family treated us like we were all family. We would fellowship together, we would eat together, we would do everything together. I mean, we would, oh God, I can't tell you all of the great experiences that I had at this church. But we're going to fast forward to current day and why I am no longer a member of that church. Like I said, I've never tried to hide my homosexuality. I've never tried to hide the person that I am. Although I didn't really live my life out loud because, like I said, we were in a different day and age. I didn't live my life out loud, but I wasn't one of those church members, those guys that went to church that were gay and pretended like they weren't, or married someone just to make it look like they weren't gay. I wasn't that wasn't me. It just wasn't me. I've always been the type of person. I don't care who you are. I don't care. You either like me or you don't. You know, if you don't like gay people, you don't like me, and we don't rock, we don't gel. I'm cool with just staying in my lane and staying away from you. That's just the type of person that I've always been. So, like I said, I never had to hide my homosexuality from anybody in my church, and as far as I knew, I thought everybody. Knew that I was gay. I mean, they never seen me coming here with a girlfriend or, I would bring girls to church, but I never introduced them as my girlfriend or anything like that. I would come to church with my boyfriends, and they would treat my boyfriends like they were family. Everybody that I brought to my church were like, "Oh, Tramel, this church is wonderful, it's beautiful," But like I said, when the pastor passed away, it kind of left the church in limbo. And there was a series of people that took over the ministry as far as in the pulpit. So we went through a series of different ministers. Some of the ministers that ministered after the pastor passed away were also members of the church. And I, believe it or not, was one of the men of the church. I sat with the deacons. I've always been that way. Now, anybody that knows me from childhood up until now knows I don't know what it is. When I go to church, I've always had an attraction to sitting with the deacons. I've always sat with the deacons. No matter what church I went to when I was a kid, when I was just a little kid, I went up there and I found a seat and I sat with the deacons in the front. Anytime I went to church, I never sat in the back of the church. I always sat with the deacons. And in my church, I sat with the deacons, and the deacons, I've never, like I said, never had any problems with the deacons in my church. They never questioned me about who I was. I never heard them talk about who I was or me being gay or anything like that. All the deacons in my church, wonderful men. We fellowshiped together. They were very respectful of me. I was very respectful of them. Great, They were like my big brothers, and they were like my elders. They were like my big brothers and my grandfathers and my fathers. That's the kind of fellowship that I had with the deacons in the church. And you may as well say I was accepted as a deacon. I just didn't hold the title. I didn't hold the title as Deacon Tramel. I just held the title as Brother Tramel. And I asked myself, and I wonder why I never did. Why didn't I ever go for my deaconship back when whenever I joined the church? I never went for my deaconship. I don't know. I was just okay with being a part of the brotherhood. That was it for me. And like I said, when I went to church, I carried myself in that environment. And that was that. I never had to be phony or anything like that, but I carried myself as a respectable going church member. Always, always, never anything different. And I never showed them any different side of me. Not that I was being phony or anything like that, but I never smoked when I went to church. I stayed, and I was a heavy, believe it or not. I used to smoke some Newport 100s. I was a heavy smoker at the time. None of my church members, I don't think they've ever seen me put a cigarette up to my mouth. But I would, I listen. It was just a totally different world. Like I said, my church was a euphoric world inside of the Church of God in Christ, because I have heard some stories. I've heard stories from people, friends of mine that went to other different churches, of how they had to sit in silence. They had to be in silence. They were sat down. They had to sit. They couldn't be on any auxiliaries in the church because they were gay, or because they did wrong, or because they left the church for a long time and just came back, and they had to, come up to the church and throw themselves at the mercy of the church, and being talked about. I know women that have been silenced because they got pregnant out of wedlock. You name it. I've heard all these, but this stuff never happened at my church. This stuff never happened at my church until recently. So we're going to fast forward. We are going to fast forward to me moving back to New Jersey. I was living in Charlottesville. I lived in Charlottesville for 10 years. And so for 10 years, I did not go to church. I did not physically go to church because I was so spoiled, and I was so dedicated and loyal to my church. I couldn't enjoy myself going to another church. I couldn't enjoy myself. So I just simply dropped out of just going to church. And I lived in Charlottesville from 2009. It was almost 10 years. 2009 to 2017. I lived in Charlottesville, Virginia. So from that time, from 2009 to 2017, I did not go to church. With the exception of the times that I would come up and visit sporadically, I would come to church to visit. I was a visiting member. Fast forwarding to 2017. 2017, I had endured a lot. I endured, and weathered through having diabetes. I became ill. There was a time when I was not able to walk. There was a time when I lost my vision. There was a time where, a lot of things were going on with me medical wise. And so when I got back to New Jersey, I was kind of recovering from all of the unfortunate medical issues that I was having. And I had just gotten out of a relationship. It wasn't a bad relationship. We amicably decided to go our separate ways. And that's what landed me back in New Jersey. I just did not want to live in Charlottesville anymore after this relationship was over with. And so when I came back, I went to stay with my mom. And so I started going back to church. My mom was still going to the same church. I was still a member of the church, and I started going back to the church. And it was a totally different world. It was a totally different world for me. Everything had changed. Things had changed. Most of the children that were kids and babies when I left were now grown adults, and they were basically running the church, along with the pastor's, one of the pastor's daughters. She became the pastor of the church. Prior to me coming back, she was the church organist. And when I tell you that she could play an organ like you would not believe, that's an understatement. And she became the pastor of the church. She went to, I believe she went and got her degree, and she became the pastor of the church. And of course, different pastor, different view, different pastor, different judgments. And like I said, she was one of the pastor's daughter, and I knew her and she knew me. She knew me since I was in my 20s, and I was, at the time, I had just turned 50 when I started coming back to church. And I enjoyed, I enjoyed her preaching. I really did. I enjoyed her preaching. I was one of those church members that if you were the pastor of the church, I was going to support you, period, point blank. I enjoyed her sermons. Her sermons were very interesting. She was very knowledgeable in the Bible. She was very knowledgeable in the Word, and her messages were, for the most part, very, very positive. And that's what I liked about her. Now let me just say this one point that I really needed to make about my church and me being gay. My previous pastor, who passed on, when I was going to the church then, I had never, and even up until um, even up until this day, I've never heard my pastor who passed on, or the current pastor. I've never heard them say anything bad about homosexuality. Never. I've never heard them preach a sermon about homosexuality. I've never heard it in my church. Never heard anyone say anything bad about homosexuality. Never have heard a sermon on how, homosexuality is a sin and you're going to hell if you're homo. I've never heard that in my church, ever. You know, but like I said, new church, new pastor, new church, new structure, everything. Like I said, the children were running the church for the most part. The young adults were running the young adults. The children that were kids when I was going to the church, and when I started going to the church, were now young adults, and they were running the church, most of them. And the pastor was the pastor's daughter. And I had a very high respect for her. I had very high regards for her. I had very high regards and very big respect for her husband, who was one of the church musicians. And he and I thought, were really good friends. I thought we were cool. Like these, and let me just say this: I never hung out with any of my church members outside of church, and I'll tell you the reason why after I finish talking to you about everything. But I never hung out with any of the congregation outside of church, with the exception of sometimes when we have service, we would go out and have dinner or breakfast or something like that. But anyway, because my spirituality is very near and dear to me, and I received what I consider a calling to become a deacon. And so I went to my pastor and I told her of, my experience and how I received what I thought was a calling on my deaconship. And I told her that I really wanted to become a deacon. And, she was so pleased and so happy. "Oh, Tremel," she said, "I'm so happy you want to become a deacon." She said, "So, we got to figure out a way to get you in classes. We have to figure out a way to get you in Bible study so that you can, start, getting everything that you need to become a deacon." And I said, "Great." And I was great and excited about becoming a deacon, because I was going to finally be standing next to all of the men and I would have my deacon pen, and I would be, you know, more in Christ, like I wanted to be. I really wanted to be. And let me just say this about church, and I'm going to do a story time on this. Let me just say this about church. Church is just one entity of religion, and for me, it's just one entity of religion, and it's not the center of my religion. It's not the center of my spirituality. But with that being said, I did want to become a deacon. And I started to. Now, this was the end all of, this was the beginning of the end for me in being in the Church of God in Christ. Like I said, I never tried to hide my homosexuality. And I've always been my own person. I've always tried to be my own authentic person. But my husband, my now husband, came back into my life, and we started seeing one another again. And eventually, I proposed to him. I proposed marriage to him, and he accepted. Excuse me. My husband accepted. So I made the announcement, and it was a bittersweet time for me. And I'll do a story time on why my proposal to my husband was a bittersweet time for me. You'll see that story time as well here on my YouTube channel. But it was a bittersweet time for me. And let me just say this without going into it. My mom, who has always known about, you know, my homosexuality, and although she wasn't accepting of it, she always told me that I was her son and that she loved me, and she didn't care whether I was gay or not. She still loved me. But my mom really didn't take my being engaged to my husband Joseph very well. Not because she didn't like Joseph. It was because based on her spirituality and her religion, me getting married to a man was just wrong. And I today believe that my mom was embarrassed of it. And so, like I said, you'll hear that in another story time. But I got word from my mom that my pastor had decided to not consider me for being a deacon. Actually, she decided that I was not going to be a deacon in her church because I was marrying a man. She could not allow me to be a deacon in her church. It was okay for me to be gay, but it was not okay for me to marry a man. It was just not okay. I also got word that one of the first gentleman, who was the pastor's husband, he approached my mom one day, and he said, you know, I see this, that your son is about to get married. My mother said, yes, my son is about to get married. He said, well, I thought he was straightening himself out. And I'm not even going to go into what my mother said to him. But basically what she said she did was she defended me. She defended my honor. But I got word from my mom that the pastor decided that I was not going to be a deacon in her church simply because I was marrying a man. And I pondered over that for a long time. It really hurt me. And it really shocked me. I was shocked and appalled that she made this decision. Not only that she made this decision, but that she had this judgment about me. I never, like I said, I never, in 28 years, well, at that time it was, 27 years. In the 27 years that I had gone to this church, I had never heard anyone say anything negative about homosexuality. I've never heard it in a sermon. I've never heard anything bad about homosexuality in my church. I just never heard it. I've never even heard anybody being judged. I've never even heard any of the congregation talking about one another badly. And I was very disappointed. I was hurt. I was shocked. I was disappointed. I wanted to know from God why, you know. I was in disbelief. But I knew that I had to make a decision. The reason why I had to make a decision is because I was about to marry the person that I loved. And I wanted to share the church experience with him. And I wanted him to be able to I wanted to be able to go to church with my husband and not have judgment, not have ridicule, not have anybody say anything bad about us, nothing like that. And believe me when I say this, I didn't want to come walking up in the church with my husband, holding his hand and sitting with him and sitting and laying on his shoulder. That's not what I wanted, because anybody that knows me knows that my husband and I, we don't show affection out in the street. We just don't. It's not because it's not accepted. It's just because we don't. We keep that private. We really do. We don't kiss out in public. We do once in a blue moon, but I mean, you wouldn't see my husband and I in a store kissing, badly, this tongue kiss or whatever. That's just not who we are. So I didn't want to come into my church holding my husband's hand and kissing on him, and I didn't want to. That's not the aesthetic that I wanted to show people. I didn't want to throw my homosexuality in the faces of my congregation, and it just simply because I've just never done that. I've just never done that. I just want to be able to come to church with my husband, and that's it. And I wanted to be a deacon, but unfortunately, the pastor decided that I was not going to be a deacon in the church, and I had a decision to make. And in making that decision, I made the decision that I was going to either go to a church that was going to be accepting of me as a person, period, point blank, whatever that was, unconditionally, or I was not going to go to church at all. I was not going to go to church at all. And so I decided to leave the church. I left, and it was very hard for me. And I didn't go to church anymore. I stopped going to church. I stopped going to church for about a year. And until a friend of mine, as a matter of fact, the person that married my husband and I, introduced me to a church in Newark that I am currently a member of. If you want to hear that story of how I started going back to church, you'll have to tune in to my next story time. But with that being said, I am going to sign off right now. I thank you so much for listening to my story time. Again, please, guys, this is new to me. I'm new to this YouTube thing. I'm a new content creator. I appreciate your views. Please hit the subscribe button at the bottom and join me. And also hit the notification bell. This is new to me. I promise you I will get better at my commentating. And please make sure that you're following us on all social media platforms. We're on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter under the McCray Kings name. And that's Kings with a Z, Kingz. And we're here at YouTube under the McCray Kings name as well. So I thank you again for joining me. And please join us again. Please take the time out and watch some of our older videos. We have interviews with celebrities like Rod Digger, Kwame, Vivian Green, and a host of other different people. And also, you'll see Joseph and I up close and personal, talk about ourselves, talk about our lives. You'll see us interact with one another, and bring some type of normalcy to this thing called gay marriage. I hate that. I hate labels. I hate titles and stuff like that. We'll talk about that in another story time. But with that being said, I'm going to sign off. I thank you for joining me. Tune in next time to my next video, and talk to you soon. With that being said, remember, it's Team McCray all damn day.